There comes a moment in every human life when the noise of the world fades, and you are left with nothing but your own breath. The pain that once consumed you is gone, yet something in you has shifted. You no longer desire what you used to, nor fear what once controlled you. It feels like standing in the space between two lives, one that has already ended, and one that has not yet begun. Jung said that the soul evolves not through comfort, but through crisis. Pain, to him, was not punishment, but instruction. It is how the unconscious calls the ego back to truth. When you endure deep suffering, the psyche does not simply want healing. It wants transformation. It dismantles everything false so that something genuine can emerge. That is why the hardest test of the soul is not surviving pain. It is learning to live after it. The ego wants to return to the old patterns of pleasure and certainty, but the soul has already moved beyond them. The silence you feel now is not emptiness. It is recalibration. The psyche is reorganizing itself around something higher, something more authentic. Jung wrote that the greatest and most important problems of life are all insoluble. They can only be outgrown. And this is what your stillness means. You are no longer fighting the wound. You are outgrowing it. If lately you have felt detached, weightless, or strangely indifferent to what once mattered, it may not be apathy. It may be evidence that you've already passed your soul's most painful test. Stay with me, because what follows are 7 subtle signs Jung observed in those who have endured transformation. 7 quiet proofs that your suffering has already turned into wisdom. When the soul has passed through its trial, the world around you doesn't change, but your relationship with it does. The colors feel muted. The laughter of others seems distant. The ambitions that once drove you now feel strangely irrelevant. You begin to notice silence more than sound, pauses more than words. People may think you've become withdrawn, but you're not retreating. You're listening. The psyche is rearranging itself beneath the surface, and the noise of ordinary life feels too fragile to touch. Jung said that after an inner death, the personality becomes porous, allowing the unconscious to breathe through it. That's what this disorientation is. The self, your deeper center, trying to make contact. You might find yourself detached from things you once chased: validation, belonging, the need to prove. You still show up, but part of you remains elsewhere, observing, waiting, measuring. It's not depression. It's the soul learning stillness after years of running. What once felt urgent now feels unnecessary. Even joy changes texture. It becomes quieter, subtler, more private. Jung described this as the withdrawal of projections, when the energy you used to invest in the outside world returns inward. It can feel lonely at first, but it's not loneliness. It's recalibration. You are rediscovering how to live from within rather than for others. Yet this phase is uncomfortable because the ego resists. It wants movement, clarity, recognition. It doesn't understand silence. The self, however, knows that stillness is where integration happens. You are being asked to stay, to not rush into another story or rebuild too quickly. The old structures, habits, roles, attachments, must dissolve fully before the new can take form. This is why the aftermath of healing can feel heavier than the wound itself. The pain had direction. Emptiness does not. It feels endless. But Jung reminded us that in the deepest layer of the wound, the psyche finds its way to renewal. If you can bear this silence without reaching for distraction, something extraordinary begins. Your energy starts to return to you. You no longer orbit around what hurt you. The pain that once defined you becomes background noise. You start seeing through the illusion of suffering itself. And it's here, in this strange quiet between what ended and what's yet to begin, that the 7 signs of transformation begin to appear. Subtle but unmistakable traces that your soul has crossed its invisible threshold. Stay with me, because what unfolds next will help you recognize those signs and understand why this calm confusion might be the most sacred phase of your entire life. In this strange stillness, 7 signs begin to emerge. The first is subtle but powerful. You no longer live for approval. Something in you stops reaching outward for confirmation of worth. You used to care deeply about being understood, about whether people saw the good in you, the effort, the pain. Now, you see how empty that game was. Jung said that much of human suffering comes from identification with a persona, the mask we wear to please the collective. The soul's painful test dismantles that mask. You start noticing how much of your old self was shaped by what others wanted to see. You begin to withdraw that energy, not out of bitterness, but clarity. You realize that validation is the hunger of the ego, and peace is the nourishment of the self. There's a calm kind of detachment in you now, a refusal to explain, justify, or prove. This doesn't make you cold, it makes you whole. The self no longer needs witnesses to exist. The second sign follows quietly. Solitude stops feeling like exile. You no longer crave noise to avoid yourself. You can spend long hours in silence without panic. The same walls that once felt suffocating now feel protective. In Jung's words, loneliness does not come from being alone, but from being unable to communicate the things that seem important to oneself. You realize you were never afraid of being alone. You were afraid of meeting the parts of yourself that waited in the silence. And now, those parts begin to return. The inner voice grows clearer. The body softens. You find that the stillness that once frightened you now feels sacred, like standing in a temple where every sound is a prayer. This is the paradox of transformation. The world doesn't become brighter, but you do. The noise outside loses its power because you've started hearing your own signal again. When you reach this stage, people may misread you. They'll say you've changed, that you've become distant. But you know the truth. You've simply stopped performing. What used to be exhaustion is now discernment. And if you stay long enough in this awareness, a deeper recognition begins to unfold. The understanding that freedom was never about escaping others, but about coming home to yourself. That's where the next signs appear, when solitude no longer isolates you, but connects you to something far larger than you ever imagined. If Jung's words speak to something deep in you, subscribe and stay close. Because the next part will take you through the moment Jung called the shadow awakening, when your darkness stops being the enemy and starts becoming your teacher. The next stage begins quietly, not with light, but with a mirror. You start to see the parts of yourself you once buried, and this time, you don't turn away. The anger, envy, manipulation, the subtle need to control, all of it surfaces like forgotten smoke. In the past, you would have denied it, called it a weakness or a sin. Now you observe. Jung said that the shadow is not evil, it is potential. Everything we reject about ourselves gathers there, waiting to be integrated. When you can finally face those impulses without judgment, something remarkable happens. The energy they once stole from you returns. You begin to sense that wholeness was never about purity. It was about honesty. This is the third sign. You stop running from your darkness. You begin to understand that awareness doesn't destroy the shadow. It dissolves its power. The monster becomes a mirror. You see your reflection inside it, and for the first time, you recognize it as human. That realization humbles you softens you. You stop dividing the world into good and bad, pure and tainted. Everything becomes part of one continuous process of growth. Then comes the fourth sign. You stop chasing meaning. There was a time when you tried to extract lessons from every loss, reasons from every pain. But now you sense that truth does not always arrive wrapped in explanations. You no longer demand answers from life. You let it unfold. Meaning becomes something you feel, not something you hunt. Jung believed that obsession with purpose is often the ego's last defense against surrender. When you release that need to know, you discover a new kind of peace, the peace of trust. And that leads to the fifth sign. You begin to trust the process itself. Even when you can't see the path, you stop doubting that it exists. The chaos that once terrified you now feels strangely intelligent, as if life were sculpting you with precision you can't yet understand. Jung compared this to the work of alchemy, the transformation of base metal into gold. The soul's gold is consciousness, and the fire that creates it is suffering born with awareness. But here's the warning. Most people turn back at this point. They taste peace and mistake it for completion. They rebuild too soon, recreate the old self in a new disguise. If you can stay through the temptation to be done, something deeper unfolds. The shadow, now seen and accepted, becomes an ally. It guards your authenticity. It teaches you boundaries, courage, and depth. If you've ever wondered why your calm feels fragile, or why peace sometimes brings unease, it's because transformation is still shaping you. Stay with it. Stay here. Because the final two signs reveal what happens after the storm of the shadow. When the temple within you begins to rise again, built not from innocence, but from integration. At a certain point, something begins to shift. The chaos no longer defines you. It starts to orbit you. You look at your past, and instead of pain, you feel understanding. This is the sixth sign. You stop identifying with your wounds. You no longer introduce yourself through the language of survival. The story you used to tell, the heartbreak, the loss, the betrayal, stops being who you are. Jung said that the wound is the place where the light enters you. But he also warned, if you keep touching the wound, you turn it into an identity. When you finally let it close, it becomes what it was meant to be, a doorway. Through it, something wiser begins to speak. You realize that healing was never about erasing pain, but integrating it. The memories remain, but they no longer pull you backward. They become symbols, not scars. And then, the seventh sign emerges. The return of sovereignty. You start to sense a quiet power within you, one that doesn't need to be asserted or defended. Your energy no longer leaks into people or situations that drain you. You feel what Jung called psychic integrity, the state in which the self governs the personality, not the other way around. The need to please dissolves. The compulsion to fix others fades. You stop absorbing the chaos around you. Instead, you hold your ground. Not through walls, but through presence. It's a kind of freedom that cannot be performed. Others may not understand it, but they feel it. It's here that the metaphor takes form. Within you, the inner temple begins to rise, not built of stone, but of awareness. Each truth you've accepted becomes a pillar. Each wound you've integrated becomes a light. The silence that once haunted you now echoes like a prayer. You realize that your peace is not fragile, it's sacred. You protect it not with force, but with reverence. Jung believed that individuation, the journey of becoming whole, is not about becoming perfect, but about building a home for the opposites within you. That home is the temple, a place where light and shadow no longer fight, but sit together in quiet conversation. You've stopped seeking heaven somewhere above because you've discovered it below, in the depths of your own awareness. And when that realization dawns, a strange serenity follows. You no longer need closure. You embody completion. The test is over, but the practice continues. What comes next is reflection, the mirror, where we begin to see what these signs truly mean for the life that now awaits you. When the storm has passed and the temple begins to rise, life doesn't suddenly become easier. It simply becomes clearer. You begin to notice small changes that reveal how far you've come. You wake in the morning, and the weight that used to meet you at the edge of consciousness is lighter. The silence that once felt unbearable now feels familiar, almost friendly. You no longer replay old conversations in your mind. The people who hurt you pass through your thoughts like clouds, present but no longer casting shadows. This is what growth looks like when no one is watching. You find yourself responding differently to things that once triggered you. Where you used to defend, you now pause. Where you used to rush to explain, you simply breathe. Jung said that everything that irritates us about others can lead us to an understanding of ourselves. You start to see this in real time. The tension dissolves because you recognize the pattern. It's no longer personal, it's psychological. The mirror no longer distorts, it reflects. And in that reflection, you see someone more centered, less reactive, softer but stronger. There's also a strange humility that comes with this awareness. You no longer need to prove that you've changed. You let people keep their versions of you. The peace you carry doesn't depend on their perception. You've stopped chasing belonging, and somehow, that's what finally makes you belong to yourself, to life, to this moment. The pain that once made you close your heart now becomes the reason you can hold others with gentleness. Compassion replaces defense. Depth replaces drama. But self-recognition is not always comfortable. Sometimes you'll still feel the echo of the old self calling you back, asking you to care too much, to try too hard, to please again. When that happens, don't fight it. Just notice it. The voice of the past will fade each time you choose awareness over reaction. That's how the new self takes root, not through force, but through repetition of presence. And slowly, something sacred settles in. The realization that you don't need to become someone new. You just need to stop abandoning who you already are. This is the real integration Jung spoke of. Not escape, not transcendence, but inclusion. The self doesn't replace the old layers. It gathers them. That's why wholeness feels both tender and powerful. It's the reunion of everything you once tried to exile. In the next part, we'll look at what this awareness demands from you. The new language you must learn to live by once you've met yourself without disguise. Once you've met yourself without disguise, you begin to notice how much of life is built on misunderstanding. The old language of survival no longer fits. Words like success, failure, right, and wrong start to lose their edges. You realize how often they were used to measure your worth, to keep you chasing instead of being. Now you speak differently, not louder, just truer. You no longer say, "I must heal," but "I am learning to live." You stop saying, "I am broken," and begin to say, "I am unfolding." This is the language of integration, the voice of a soul that no longer divides itself into parts. Jung said that we don't become enlightened by imagining figures of light, but by making the darkness conscious. Integration is not about never falling. It's about knowing who's watching when you do. You start to treat your emotions not as problems, but as messages. Anger becomes information. Fear becomes sensitivity. Sadness becomes depth. Even emptiness becomes a doorway. You no longer resist what you feel because you've seen that resistance only multiplies pain. The moment you stop fighting the inner weather, you begin to understand it. But this new language is not comfortable, it's quiet. It doesn't win arguments, it dissolves them. It doesn't promise happiness, it delivers meaning. Sometimes it even costs you relationships, because peace, to those still addicted to chaos, can feel like rejection. Yet this is where authenticity begins. You start to choose truth over comfort, alignment over approval. The boundaries you set are no longer punishment. They're prayers, ways of saying, I honor what my energy can hold. And here is the paradox. The more honest you become, the less you need to explain. Silence starts speaking for you. People begin to feel your calm before they hear your words. Jung believed that integrated individuals emit a kind of psychic gravity, a natural authority that doesn't dominate but steadies. You start to carry that presence without trying. You no longer enter a room looking for belonging. Your stillness makes others remember theirs. And if you stay, you'll see why Jung called this quiet language the beginning of real power. Because this is not the power to control, but to remain whole. The power to hold joy without clinging, and pain without collapse. It's the strength that comes from no longer needing to be anyone other than what life has already made you. Integration does not make you invincible. It makes you human, fully and tenderly so. It teaches you that depth is not heaviness, it's clarity. That softness is not weakness, it's the proof that you've survived your own hardness. In the next part, we'll move from awareness to practice, from knowing to living. You'll see how to carry this stillness into your daily life without losing the sensitivity that brought you here. Integration is not a destination, it's a rhythm. It happens in the smallest moments of ordinary life. Jung believed that awareness must be lived, not worshipped. The first practice is simple. Pause before you respond. When someone triggers you, breathe. Let the emotion rise and pass through before you give it a name. This is how the unconscious becomes conscious, through attention, not analysis. The second, create daily silence. 5 minutes without input. No music, no scrolling, no talking, just space. In that space, the self begins to speak again. You'll notice that clarity doesn't shout, it whispers. When you listen to that whisper long enough, choices that once felt impossible become obvious. The third practice, honor your limits. Jung said that a tree that grows to heaven must send its roots to hell. Growth requires grounding. Say no when your energy says no. Protect what is soft in you without apology. Stillness doesn't mean inaction. It means acting from alignment instead of urgency. And finally, remember this. You are not meant to live in constant light. The psyche moves in seasons. Some days you'll feel expansion, others contraction. Trust both. The soul matures through rhythm, not perfection. The next part will show you what happens when you truly live this rhythm, how life begins to rearrange itself around your inner clarity, and what kind of person you become when peace is no longer a visitor, but your home. Wholeness changes everything, and it doesn't ask for permission. When you begin to live from your inner center, the world you once knew starts to rearrange itself. Some people will fall away, not because you stopped loving them, but because you no longer need to play the role they required. Jung warned that the individuation process often isolates those who undergo it. He called it the loneliness of becoming real. Wholeness asks you to give up your masks, but not everyone is ready to meet you without theirs. At first, this distance can ache. The silence that once healed you might now feel heavy again. But it's not regression. It's refinement. The psyche is testing your roots, asking if your peace depends on agreement or on truth. You start realizing that not everything peaceful is kind, and not everything kind is true. This is maturity, the ability to hold contradiction without collapsing. The world remains chaotic, but you no longer mirror it. You carry your own climate. This is the price of integration. You outgrow the familiar. The old dramas lose their flavor, and simple things, sunlight on the floor, quiet meals, genuine laughter, become enough. The ego mourns this simplicity. It misses the noise it once mistook for meaning, but the self feels lighter. Jung said that when a person integrates their shadow, they acquire a new authority, not over others, but over their own reactions. You begin to notice it, a calm that follows you into every room, not because life is gentle, but because you are. And this is the reward. Freedom. Not the freedom to do whatever you want, but the freedom to stay true in any circumstance. The kind that can sit in uncertainty without losing balance, that can love without needing to own, that can stand alone without feeling abandoned. You stop demanding perfection from yourself, from others, from life. You begin to live in dialogue with the unknown, trusting that whatever comes, you'll meet it awake. But Jung also left a warning. He said, "No tree can grow to heaven unless its roots reach down to hell." The deeper your consciousness, the greater your responsibility. The more awake you become, the more gently you must walk. Awareness is not armor, it's sensitivity sharpened into grace. And that's where the final part begins, when you no longer seek to pass the test, but to live from what it taught you. When your peace stops being an escape and becomes a quiet form of courage. After the long descent and the rising silence, you realize that nothing outside you needed to change. The test was never about survival. It was about remembrance. Somewhere along the way, you stopped searching for light and became it. The storms still come, but they no longer unmake you. The rain doesn't extinguish your flame. It cleans the glass around it. You walk slower now, speak softer, and love deeper. Not because life is easier, but because you are more real. There is a lamp within you that no longer flickers with circumstance. Jung said that a person becomes free when they can stand between opposites and not be torn apart. That's what you've become. The space that holds both. The calm after the chaos. The awareness inside the ache. You are no longer waiting for the world to mirror your peace. You have become the mirror. And perhaps that is the final lesson of the soul's most painful test. That it was never meant to break you, but to make you transparent. So that the divine light, long buried beneath your defenses, could finally shine through. As you step into the next chapter, carry that lamp gently. Let it light your way through both the ordinary and the unknown. Because this journey never really ends. It simply deepens. And somewhere, beyond the quiet, another mystery is already waiting to meet you.